tonight, we're going to talk about a different way to look at the future. The last 3 or 4 weeks, we've been talking about God's will. And if you've been paying attention, God's will rarely, if ever, talks about our past. Sometimes refers to our present, but most of the time is talking about what's in front of us. I'm excited about that. I hope you are. Because God's will for us is to help us see, to understand, to process what's in front of us, what's out in front of us. The Bible will call it the hope of God for us, His hope for us. So the title of our talk this evening is right along the theme we've been on, God's will, God's vision. We're going to be studying both of these topics intertwined, God's will for you and His vision for you tonight. So we've said exchanging our personal will for God's will calls us, in essence, to hand off, like the picture of these guys playing football, to take this commitment from within our heart and make it something in our everyday life that affects every day. Taking God's will. So we sense it in here, we understand it in our mind, in our imagination, and then we make it a part of our will. That's really where we're going to head tonight, exchanging our will, not only for God in our mind, that we're going to make up that decision in our soul and in our head, but now what happens in our life when that actually occurs? We began asking, well, if God did have His way in your life, what would look different? What would be different for you? Bottom paragraph says, this means that I got to seek out God's future, His vision, His hope for me. And that's where this intentionality of following Jesus begins. And we talked about this word. We begin to intentionally lean in to the hope God has for us. So let me ask you a question, those of us who have followed people in our past. Why do people often rebel and separate themselves from leadership? Would you think about that for a minute?
This is Linda.
Yes, ma'am.
I see sometimes people don't understand what the leader is telling them, perhaps, don't fully understand the instructions or fully understand how to implement whatever it is that they've been instructed to do.
Excellent. So it's not only understanding of direction, but it's also understanding of strategy of how are we going to do this? Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. Yes. Wonderful. And also fear of change or fear of the unknown. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I'm being asked to change, and I'm being asked to give up some things, but not a real clear reason for why, justification for it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's excellent insight, Linda. Thank you. Thank you. So a person that is surrendering their will, well, this is kind of a big deal here if that's been our experience, because to surrender our will for God's will and seeking after His vision for our life, if He had His way, means that we have to find somehow to get past being led by human beings to understand that God would never treat us that way. Whoa, hold on to that for a minute. That God would never poorly communicate to us where He wants us to go. God would never give us a negative experience in terms of leading poorly. So I cannot put God in the same box that I might put past experiences with leaders, because He doesn't fit in that box at all. He's in a box all to His own. But His example is where I want to lead tonight. His example of how to lead others with vision and how to communicate with vision as a leader, whether you're a parent, you're a small group leader, you're a committee or a church leader or a pastor or a business leader. Jesus sets the standard for how to lead people with vision, not the world. And this is the model I want to talk about tonight. That's pretty stinking exciting right there. Because as I began to look into God's word, I realized quickly that The way God leads with the concept of vision is very different from the way the world does. Let's revisit a passage that we've been looking at for the last couple of weeks. I have been landing right here, Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Read it to yourself as I read it out loud. Paul's prayer over the church in Rome. Do not conform. Here we go. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. Say it. His good, his pleasing, his perfect will. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. We'll add sisterly love to that as well tonight. Yeah, so when I think about God's will, his vision for me as a person, for you as a person, the question comes then, if God had his way in my life, what would I look like? What would my relationships with people be like? What would my friendships with the ones closest to me be like? What would my connection at my church be like? And even into my extended family, the family I married into, and so forth. What would be different about you and me?